as I approached retirement, that's something that I saw was this change, just the level of respect. People just don't care who you are. They don't recognize, they're not recognizing the badge or the authority. I think that's what I started to notice or feel for some reason. I couldn't give you any, I can't point to one thing that made me think that or feel that way. But I think just over time, and then as I got closer, even in 2013, it was starting to look different
Yeah.
than it did at any point prior to that.
Okay. Can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Yeah, my name's Duane Larson.
Duane, who did you work for?
My law enforcement career was with the Oregon State Police.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up.
I grew up a couple of different places, really, but primarily in around Tillamook, Oregon.
Okay. So you're a lifelong Oregonian.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Any military experience?
No.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about the difference between the Oregon State Police and a highway patrol unit or highway patrol group.
Sure. Well, I can give you my understanding anyway because I've never worked for a highway patrol.
Okay.
But the advantages with the Oregon State Police is it's a state police organization, and so because of that, as opposed to a highway patrol, who again, my understanding, like with California, they're limited to highways. That's what they do is patrol a highway. Uh, I can't speak to other functions they might have, but I think as far as I know, that's their primary duty
Yeah.
or area of responsibility. As opposed to the Department of State Police in Oregon, because it's a state police organization, it therefore uh, uh, encompasses criminal investigations, fish and wildlife enforcement. In other words, OSP would be the enforcement arm for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Um, what else? OLCC, emergency communications. So OSP over the years, I think, has become more of an umbrella
Hmm.
organization as opposed to just law enforcement. Uh, but OSP enforces traffic laws in the state of Oregon, criminal laws, fish and wildlife law. Um, uh, we've got the criminal identification services bureau.
Hmm.
So if you need a criminal history run on somebody, or if you need to run fingerprints, it would be the state police doing that on that end.
Okay. And I know that you said they used to be called outposts and now they're work sites. So the outposts are basically offices all across Oregon. How many work sites do you have?
Uh,
And maybe it's changed since you
yeah,
retired.
I'm sure it's changed. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and some of the language has changed, and that's what I was getting to. Uh, Years ago, they were outposts. For example, my experience at the Burns outpost probably when I got there and when I left, it was a work site,
Okay.
meaning that it was a work site belonging to or like an extension of an area command. In the case of Burns, Oregon, that work site was an extension of or an outpost of the Ontario Area Command.
Yeah.
When I got hired and went to Tillamook, Tillamook was a station, um, and stations became area commands. Uh, Outposts became work sites. So, so same thing, only different.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me how you got to law enforcement. How did you end up? Did OSP, was that the place you wanted to work from the very beginning?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
Um, I didn't. I grew up. I never had a desire. I mean, it wasn't my goal in life to become to work for in law enforcement or work for a police organization. Um, Went through. I graduated from high school in Seaside, Oregon. Went a year to college. Just commuted back and forth to Astoria, Clatsop community. And then after my freshman year, I had intentions to go to Oregon State. But after my freshman year at the community college, I got a job in Longview working for a contractor up there and living with a buddy of mine who was living there to get his, he was working on his journeyman's, his electrical journeyman's card. And so he found a contractor up there that needed a hand for the summer. So I went up there and spent a summer building houses or, that type of work, just labor. And when I came back, that moment, in fact, I came back home and registered for my second year at the community college. I had already been accepted to Oregon State. And I registered, and then even before the first day of class, I decided it's just not in me anymore. So like I always enjoyed school, always did well, sports and, all kinds of stuff. But I just couldn't just wasn't motivated to go back. And so much to my mom's dismay.
Those moms.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I went back to Longview, went back to work for the same guy, and then he just got to a point where he just couldn't afford to pay me. So about the same time, I had an older brother in Hillsboro, Oregon, who just had built a house or had a house built. So he talked to that contractor, his contractor, and got me a job with that guy. So I moved down to that area and went to work for him. About a year later, one of my coworkers and I decided to go into business together, building houses. So that was about October of '78. And so I was building houses here in the Valley till '85. And it was such a poor existence that it was just hand to mouth.
Uh-huh.
And part of that time, and I couldn't even tell you the years now, but Carter was president. Inflation was like through the roof, double digits.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was just hand to mouth, really competitive. If you have any viewers who are out in the construction field, we were bidding framing jobs for $1 and a quarter a square foot, which the last I checked, they're probably $10 or better.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So a world of difference. But I got married in summer of '79, and then we had a couple of kids. By '84, we had 2 sons, and we just weren't making it. So I had a good friend who was a trooper at the Arlington outpost on 84 out there. And he said, "Man, you ought to apply with the state." And I said, "Oh, okay." And so I did. I applied with OSP in '85. And then shortly after, I got, I think, right up to the background process, and then they put a hiring freeze on. And so I didn't, I think they opened up that process again in it would have been late '86, probably, like fall of '86. And I ended up getting hired and then went to the first recruit school we'd had. That was March of '87.
Okay, so let me ask you some questions. How old are you when you get hired?
The first day of the academy was March 1. I turned 30.
Okay.
March 4.
So older for your class?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you got a little.
Yeah, I think so. There were some older guys and
Okay.
older people.
Okay.
And that class, March of '87, was the first group of hirees since '84. So it'd been 3 years. And so my class, I think there were like 70 people, and then they split us into 2. Within the same academy, there were 2 classes.
Mm.
So it was really a larger group of hirees.
Okay.
And then we did 14 weeks and went to our stations.
Do you feel like at age 30, you got a little bit of life experience, you were able to adapt a little bit better?
No.
Okay. Okay, well, so
Yeah.
essentially you join OSP because you're living hand to mouth. Is it fair to say that you wanted a more stable job career?
Well, that my I mentioned I had two sons at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The one of them was born in '82, one in '84, and the youngest at that time, um, like we didn't have health insurance when I got hired. Like we'd gone without health insurance,
Mm-hmm.
and we had him on like a probably WIC, I think, like a supplement program
Yeah.
through the county or however that worked. Um, so yeah, it was tough trying to buy a house, and that wasn't working out. So we were, the more we tried to get ahead, just typical, the further behind we were getting. So OSP was an opportunity to, yeah, definitely improve our living situation, uh, provide an opportunity for health insurance, and we wanted another kid or more kids, probably just one more. But which we did. We had a third son a couple of years after, I think a year and a half after I got hired, a year after,
Mm-hmm.
which we would not have done had I not gotten hired. So we've called him the department baby, just because we had the benefits to do that.
Yeah. Did you, once you got in with OSP, was the goal, obviously you wanted health insurance and, salary and everything else. Did you think that once you got in that you would stay the 20, 25 years, or you thought, let's give this a try and maybe I'll move on to something else?
No, I saw it as a career opportunity. Um, and part of that too, because when I got hired, I was 29, almost 30. So my perspective probably was that this is a career choice. Uh, Besides that, I can't keep climbing walls and roofs, pounding nails for, you know, a lot longer. I mean, that wasn't my life goal either.
Yeah.
Um, but when I applied, so that was never a goal of mine to find a career. Like I didn't grow up looking for a career in law enforcement or the military. That just happened to work out the way it did. But when I did apply with OSP, I did make a conscious decision that it's either OSP or nobody. Because in my mind, from just growing up, I just viewed OSP as the best. Like I don't want to work for anybody else. So if I can't get a job with them, then I'll find something else to do.
Okay, so did you have interaction with OSP when you were younger then?
No, not really.
What
It's
what
just
made you think that they were the best? I mean, was it here's the question. Prior to you talking to your friend and your friend saying, "Hey, I think you should apply," did you have any interaction with OSP or have any thought process about those guys?
well, I think my only thought process was probably image.
Okay.
In my perspective or my perception of OSP growing up, or maybe through high school, not that I ever had any interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'd gotten a couple of tickets, but um, but I think it had more to do with my perception of how I saw OSP, how they were represented, and so my like this is what I think of OSP.
Mm.
Um, Versus I probably had more interaction with local, like the locals, PDs once in a while. And not that I was never out causing problems, but um, I think growing up and over the years, I just developed my own perception of agencies,
Yeah.
and then probably, but I had the one friend I mentioned who had been a troop for a while, and we were good friends, and so I'm sure that helped
So
develop some of that perception.
so when you get to the academy and you're 30-ish, do you have any idea what you're getting into?
No, 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 and I still remember, if I remember right, when I got hired, mine was the first academy at Camp Rilea on the coast.
Hmm.
Brand new barracks. Camp Rilea is a National Guard facility. It's right on the beach,
Yeah.
separated by some dunes of pine trees. Um, no, but I missed out on the military because so I didn't have that background.
Mm-hmm.
The background I had was I get up, go to work every day, work hard, come home. Here's my wife and two little kids.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I still remember walking into the barracks, like parking up there and then walking across with whatever I was allowed to bring, and then walking into the barracks and the door shut behind me. What?
So are they running a militaristic type academy then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Well, OSP was organized in 1931, and it was some Marine, whatever he was. I couldn't tell you who that was now, but yeah, the Marines had a hand in the organizational structure. So chain of command and a lot of the ceremony that went along with that.
so is it shock to the system as the door shuts and then
Totally, yeah.
uh,
Because I was self-employed. I was 29, self-employed up to that point. I didn't need anybody telling me when to go to bed or how to brush my teeth or when the lights need to go off or how to make my bed or uh, dinging my clothes in the locker and then you got a ding and what?
are you how is the academy run for OSP? Are you there for the week and then on the weekend you get to go home and see your family, or are you kind of there for the whole time?
Well, I can only speak to mine.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was 14 weeks, and we got to go home every other Thursday, and then we'd have to be back the next Sunday.
Okay.
So every other weekend.
So you're married at this point. Your wife has seen you through contracting days, stuff like that. What does she think when you say, I'm going to apply for OSP?
I don't remember that conversation. I mean, I don't remember any pushback.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think we both knew that we need to do something different.
Okay.
In fact, um, I think we were trying to buy a house. Yeah, we I think we got married in 79, bought a house on contract in 80 with a 5-year balloon and ended up giving that back. And fortunately, the guy was kind enough to take it back.
Right.
So that would have been 85.
Okay.
And then I know we were in a duplex in Hillsboro when I got hired, and then that's where they were when I went to the academy.
Okay. How was your academy run? I mean, you said that OSP, you get to do a lot of, or you got to do a lot of different things, but I think in general, OSP gets to do a lot of things. Was it just focused on the patrol, or did they give you other training while you're at the academy?
Yeah, there's other training. But I think so. I mean, there's a lot of basic training, and I'm sure I've forgotten more than more than I remember certainly. But yeah, they would have provided training, a certain just minimal training like across the board.
Yeah.
Um, but it was really probably primarily focused on patrol. Like we had EVOC, emergency vehicle operations. So we'd go from Camp Rilea, it wasn't far, up the highway to Astoria, and then we drove cars around on some paved wharf up there.
And it's got to be, I mean, up until this point, no police work, no military. But when you start doing stuff like EVOC, you got to be going, hey, this is pretty cool.
There's some cool things. Yeah. 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 And it was good prep. There's always that certain element where you can go from the academy to life on the job,
Mm-hmm.
and some of that maybe you expand on some of those principles from the academy, or
Mm-hmm.
some of that you maybe throw out the window because this is useless. Just depends. But yeah, well, EVOC, for instance, I'm sure I don't really remember what we were driving. The EVOC cars,
Uh-huh.
the surveyed cars that are on their last legs, the with the bald tires. But when I got to Tillamook, what I learned, for example, we had within the district, the state was broken up into different, now they're regions, but different districts, I think,
Mhm.
back then. But they had like a Mustang, a Mustang as a patrol car that would float from office to office. And when it was at the Tillamook office, I maybe drove it a couple of times. It was a lot of fun to drive, but it was totally made no sense as a patrol car. There's no back seat. We had a rope about an inch, I don't know how big it was, inch and a quarter, bolted, one end bolted to the floor. And if you arrest somebody, they got to go and they got to ride shotgun, cuffed, and then you put their feet together on the floor, loop that rope around their ankles, and hang it out the door and shut the door on the rope.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
and it was manual, and we had one guy, one troop in the office that's all he drove when we had the car. Like he loved it, but it was squirrely, fast, squirrely, and as much rain as we used to get on the coast.
oh yeah.
Yeah, I just thought, man, I won't be able to. This is like death trap. So,
So you grew up in Tillamook, right?
we, well, to go all the way back, when I was born,
Mm-hmm.
we lived in Vernonia.
Okay.
A lot of my family and relatives were from that Nehalem Valley area. We lived in Vernonia, but we moved to Netarts, which is like 6 miles west of Tillamook,
Okay.
when I was 3. And then we moved into town, into Tillamook, when I was about 10. And then moved on up to Seaside when I was 11.
The reason I ask is, maybe you were too young, but by the time you get back to Tillamook, are you dealing with anybody that you know
Um,
or used to know?
as I recall, there were some familiar names, but I would have been really young when we left. And then um, there were a few names I remember because a lot of those people down there, I mean, they're Century Farms,
Sure.
dairies,
Right.
and so same last name. Oh, I remember that name, but different. Their descendants or relatives.
Well, the reason I ask is, I had interviewed a WSP trooper, and he goes, "Hey, I grew up in this area. I came back, and then I'm dealing with people. I pull over my third grade teacher." So I'm assuming you didn't have any of that.
I arrested a childhood friend of mine.
Okay. So how is that? How is that when you're going back to an area that you know people and you may run into them? How do you deal with that mentally?
Well, I don't recall a lot of that. I mean, as I said, there were a lot of familiar names, but I didn't run into, other than the one that really stands out.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't run into a lot of folks because I was young when we left.
Okay.
By the time I went back 19 years
Yeah.
later, probably a lot of those people that I knew when I was a kid were probably more friends of my parents and so on. So some of those I'm sure had moved on or just were old enough that I didn't really have any interaction with. But
But how about arresting that childhood friend? Was there a realization, oh my gosh, this is somebody that I used to know? I mean, tell me how that plays out.
I didn't have a problem with that at all.
Okay.
Well, when we moved to Tillamook after I got hired, I had a pickup that I sold at some point, and actually there were two stories with the same guy. Um, I arrested him for giving me a false name, and I stopped him. I didn't know who it was when I stopped him for whatever reason I stopped him for out on the highway. Pull him over, and as I walked up, I recognized him, but he didn't recognize me, and he didn't have any ID, giving me a name, and I knew it was a false name. And so anyway, we go through that whole back and forth, and he has his opportunities, but he just won't come clean. So I arrested him, take him to jail, and I think at the time, I don't think she was there, but he had a relative working in the jail as a corrections officer. She wasn't there when I took him up there, but I talked to her on a night shift after after the fact. But that was who he was at the time. You know, as adults, that's where he ended up.
Did it ever dawn on him that you knew him?
I'm not sure it ever, not that I heard of. I'm not aware that it did.
Okay.
But the same guy, I did hear, that was my pickup story, was that another troop encountered him a different time. And I had sold a pickup that I had, and then this other troop encountered him up the river one day. And the same guy pulled the registration, which was my old registration, and handed it to the troop. And of course, the troop who came on with me, same class, well, he knew that, you know, wait a minute, I know this guy, that's not you.
And what are the chances?
Yeah. Well, he was just living his life. You need to stop having run-ins with the law, I guess, or you can't get your act together.
Are you 30-ish when you go on patrol for the first time?
Yeah. Because our academy was 14 weeks, and I turned 30 just a few days into the academy.
Okay. Yeah. So when you get to Tillamook, you're on patrol. I don't know if you remember your first day or first couple times you're out there. What's going through your head because I'm assuming you're out on your own.
No, I think so that's changed also. When I came on, my class, I think we have a probationary period.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember really what, I think it might have been a year, 12 months. I think since then it increased maybe 18 months. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But no, when we graduate from the academy, go to our stations, and then we're assigned a coach. So I rode with a coach. It might have been 3 months, but in that coach recruit period of time, and everybody starts out on a day shift. And then you get a week or two of night shift with somebody else still on patrol. That's to get your DUI practice.
Mm-hmm.
And then 1 or 2 weeks of criminal time where I rode around with that detective I'd mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty interesting too, because we actually had a homicide while I was riding with him. So that was interesting.
Was that in the beginning of your career?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's after the academy during my probationary period of time.
Okay, so you're riding around with a coach, and then you end up riding around with a detective.
Yeah, it's all during that 3 month. I think it's within that same coach recruit period,
Okay.
3 months, like academy graduation. Then you're with a coach.
Okay.
At your assigned station.
But that's interesting. So I'm assuming one of the coaches has to do with, more patrol,
Mm-hmm.
but because you said OSP has a very different variety of what you do, then you get assigned to a detective and he kind of, chaperones you and tells you what he does?
I just rode with him, did what I was told. But as it turned out, while I was riding with, and this is the same detective that I mentioned then went away later,
mm-hmm.
like maybe a couple of years later, he was assigned to that task force.
Mm-hmm.
For the Michael Frank homicide. Is that right? So I rode with him for maybe a week or two. But while I was riding with him, we had a homicide in South County, French National, visiting on his bike and got bludgeoned to death in the middle of the night through his, it was like Thanksgiving Eve, I think. So that would have been about 87. It seems like that would have been about right, I guess. Anyway, I got some exposure there to.
When you start getting that exposure, Duane, I mean, do you ever have Because I'm assuming you guys have detectives, right?
Mhm.
In OSP. Is there any time during your career where you go, you know what, my goal is to do X?
Mhm.
How did that work out for you? I mean, what did you want to do?
Well, earlier, while we were still in Tillamook, over time, I wanted a game job. I wanted to transfer, which would have been like a lateral. So I still would have been a trooper,
Hmm.
same pay and everything, same.
Yeah.
But I want to go from the patrol division to fish and wildlife.
Okay.
And
Just because you had a background growing up.
yeah, yeah. So I wanted to be out driving hills, setting up tactical plans for poachers and,
Yeah.
doing night flights and checking fishermen and whatnot. But as I said, even working the road, I could still do some of that. Even like if there's just no traffic today,
Hmm.
oh, there's somebody fishing, I'm going to dive over the bank and check a fisherman. And made some snagging cases and doing that kind of thing. So that's why those opportunities were really fun and motivating, but the variety,
Yeah.
um, which I think lends itself to a much more rounded career as opposed to like a highway patrol
Right.
um, in some other places. But um, in uh, uh, during our marriage, usually our vacations were spent traveling up into the national forest in Central Oregon. That was our vacation every summer, and over time, as I had more vacation time, we spent longer. But it was two or three, or maybe one or two times a year, heading up into the national forest and camping with the kids and fishing. If it was hunting season, we'd spend some vacation time going back to the same place and deer hunting or whatever.
Mm.
But that area was within the operational area of the Prineville outpost. And Prineville would have been an outpost back then of the Bend office.
Oh yeah.
And Prineville is still around, still there, although it's a work site of Bend, I think. As far as I know, it is. But while we were still in Tillamook, I really wanted a game job, and I wanted to go to Prineville because we loved it over there as a family, and I knew the country, and I thought, man, that would be perfect. Well, at that time, Prineville had two game troopers, both long in the tooth, and I thought, well, one of them retires, then I want to get my foot in the door, and so yeah, I was really interested in that. That was a goal at the time.
Hmm.
And in my pursuit of that goal, uh, I can remember standing in our dining room of our house. I made a phone call to the captain of the, or had a phone call. I don't think I just called him up, but we ended up. He might have accepted a message or something. Anyway, we ended up on the phone together. This particular captain of the Fish and Wildlife Division. And by the end of that phone call, I thought, no, there's no way. I'm, I'm not going to work for that guy
Uh,
ever.
uh,
So I just, I mean, in my own mind, that just eliminated any desire to work in that division.
Interesting.
I was content being doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'll write uh, tickets to, check fishermen and do all the stuff I've been doing, but there's no way I don't want to be a part of that division as long as that guy is head of that division.
Right. Hey, okay. I want to ask you some specific questions about road work in Tillamook and then in Burns. You're not in a very populated area. So once you're off I don't even want to call it probationary period, but when you're on your own,
Mhm.
any trepidation? You worried about your own safety as you're driving around by
Mhm.
yourself?
Um, well, I don't, I wouldn't use that word. worried. I mean, that's why we spend so much time training.
Sure.
And OSP in particular, contrary to probably most TV shows, there are no two-man cars.
Right.
Yeah, everybody's on solo patrol. Um, Burns. Now, when I transferred to Burns in February '98, it was a promotion. Our outpost work sites are supervised by sergeants,
Okay.
who then answer to a lieutenant somewhere else, which would be the office or the area command. Like the Burns work site is supervised by a patrol sergeant who answers to the area command lieutenant in charge of the area, some in Ontario in that case. But as far as so even though Tillamook is a small office, relatively small office, in fact, when I got there, it was an area command. We had a lieutenant. When I got to Tillamook the first day, we had a lieutenant, a first sergeant, and a patrol sergeant.
Mm.
Over those next few years, they eliminated that middle management, like the first sergeant rank, and I think it worked out in Tillamook that our first sergeant promoted to lieutenant, and then they just eliminated that position. But Tillamook and Tillamook County definitely more populated than Burns and Harney County.
Mm-hmm.
The population density, I think Tillamook County would probably be just like rural, based on population per square mile, or whatever that figure is. But Burns is a different story. I think that would qualify as frontier. So it's the second largest county in the state of Oregon, next to Malheur. And probably, I mean, their population was decreasing when I got there because they had closed down a mill that had been there for forever. So they're actually losing people, and most of that population in Harney County is in Burns, between Burns and Hines, like the bedroom community.
Mm-hmm.
And it only accounts for, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 people, if that. I think there's maybe only 7,000 in the entire county. So once you get outside Burns, there's really nobody out there.
Okay, so give me a difference between, and I don't want to talk about Portland yet, but the difference between Tillamook, that's a little bit more populated, and Burns. If you need backup, what's the difference in response time for somebody when you were in Tillamook versus in Burns?
Forever.
Either one?
Well, Tillamook, no. Back up in Tillamook was, well, relatively speaking, never far away. And even outside of Tillamook proper, Tillamook has its own police department.
Mm-hmm.
The county, the sheriff's office is housed, well, now it's housed south of town. When I left, it was a new building. We occupied the same building as the sheriff's office, a few miles south of Tillamook. But even in an extreme circumstance, help and backup in Tillamook County, maybe 15, 20 minutes.
Still a long time.
Well, that would be extreme.
Okay.
I mean, I would think that'd be like the exception.
But how's that compared to Burns, though?
When I was in Burns, we lost our general law detective. It became a DA assist position, split between Burns and the John Day outpost, which is 70 miles away. So you'd do halftime as investigating for the district attorney.
Yeah.
We had one game guy who, that's a good example of the difference between Tillamook. We had 3 game guys and a game sergeant in Tillamook. You go out, do your 8-year shift and go home. Our game guy in Burns, he'd go out for days at a time. like take his gear and head off into the mountains.
Wow. It's almost like Forest Service then,
Yeah.
BLM.
Yeah.
Wow.
Um, and so a lot of the time I was there, we had 3 road troops. But the Burns work site with 3 road troops and then myself, we had over 400 miles of state and federal highway in our patrol area. We patrolled all the way south from Burns to the Nevada border in a couple of places, all the way east to Highway 95 at Jordan Valley. And then that's where we start to overlap or run into the Ontario uh, area of coverage. So yeah, really the philosophy in the work site or, in Burns was if somebody's going to get froggy, tell them to start hopping, but like it's game on. I mean, you do what you need to do.
Okay. With that being said, did you ever have a scenario, and how do you deal with this? You're out in the middle, your backup's 45 minutes, hour away. You pull over a car with like 3 or 4 dudes that don't look good, right? How do you deal with that? Do you just go, we're just going to call this good and we just, whatever? Or how do you deal with that knowing that you now have 3 people? Because I'm always watching these incidents with patrol guys. Somebody wants to fight you, but man, you're out in the middle of nowhere with just like multiple people. How do you deal with a situation like that?
Well, in my experience over there, I would have to say that we were really fortunate to have not had a circumstance like that I can remember sitting here. However, the approach would have been, your radio is your friend, and if you have any, like if this is a situation where you're looking for these particular people, uh, you're not obligated to stop them anywhere. Let them come.
Yeah.
And we'll send help. You let them come, and then we'll find a place. We'll be tactical about it.
Okay.
If it's a surprise, I mean, if you stop a car and things go sideways, then you need to be on the radio. And when you realize what's happening, your radio is your friend, and you do what you need to do. Get out of there, or I mean, I could think of other examples over there that outside of Burns, and I'm sure there's been other incidents before I got there and after I left.
Sure.
Also, but yeah, every situation is different, and you just really have to. I think that's part of those are scenarios you have to visualize or talk about.
Yeah.
Beforehand, like, hey, we've all elected to be here, and this is the nature of this is the nature of the job and the nature of our environment.
Yeah.
Here's what you're up against. And I think some of that country is so remote that we had, there's a couple of examples. I was at home one Sunday morning at 6 a.m. and got a call about a crash out on one of the highways out of town. And it was a milepost 62. The Burns is 0. It was 62 miles out, Highway 78. And I didn't call anybody out. I responded myself, and sure enough, here's this old Ford pickup center punch this juniper tree in the only turnout for miles, and it was the only tree for probably as far as you could see out in that country. It would have been like southeast of Crane. There's just nothing out there.
Yeah.
But some hills, no trees except for that one. But I went all the way out there. EMS had already been there, took the guy back to the hospital in Burns. So I went out, looked it over. Well, he hit the tree on purpose. Like he was trying to kill himself, but he didn't. And they took him back to the hospital. So I went up and interviewed him up there and pointed out that, you know, that tree was 100 years old. Like, and now it's uprooted and you know.
What do you say? The tree jumped out of.
No, like he was trying to do himself in,
Okay.
and just thought that would be but it was ineffective.
Yeah.
But that's an example, you know, that response time.
Yeah.
And how far you have to go. Another good example, I was on duty one day, had one troop who was way out east, and we had a rollover fatality down the south end of the Steens Mountain, so just 20 miles north of Nevada, Denio. So I left from the office, and he left from where he was. There were two roads. His road, though, we used to call the 100-mile-an-hour gravel road. We both got down there, but it took me an hour and a half, like code, at least an hour and a half to get from the office to the crash scene. And on the way, I passed the ambulance, lights on, and they were stopped on the highway with a flat tire. And so I stopped and said, "We good? Yeah, we got it." So I took off, and then they eventually got there. And then they couldn't transport the deceased driver. So we had to wait for the funeral home from Burns to get all the way down there. Of course, they can't run code. So it was a long afternoon, but yeah, it's so vast.
Yeah.
But that's why I loved it over there. Like,
so tell me, two questions for you. Tell me the difference between working in those type of communities and when you get transferred to Portland. What are the different things that you're working on? Or are you working on different things? And then the other thing is, did you notice a difference in people, in your interaction? Because Eastern Oregon they've got a whole different mentality than city folk here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, whole different culture.
Yeah.
When I got going to Burns was a promotion for me.
Okay.
And so my role was different over there. A lot less time on the road. But there were, in that position, probably earlier on in my time in Burns, for example, as I interacted with people like the director of the juvenile department in the courthouse, or other people, you know, within the criminal justice circle over there, different committees. And the juvenile department was probably a good example. Over there, if a kid, at least then, if a kid got caught with alcohol, for instance, the director, not the judge, the director of the juvenile department at the time, she would hang on to their driver's license. And so, probably longer story short. So that was a conversation that I had with her when I, you know, at some point about, look, you're not doing anybody any favors. That's not what the law is. You're not helping the kids. They're not suffering it. There's no consequence.
Right.
And I used to have run-ins with because we had a justice court for traffic violations. And probably a couple of different judges, but one old guy judge, we used to butt heads. He'd kicked me out of his office one day because he would accept calls from defendants. Like we go out and write a seatbelt ticket out on the highway, and then they'd call him and he'd dismiss it. Or we'd write an equipment violation, you know, and usually, you know, I would tell a driver, "Hey, yeah, here's your ticket, but get it fixed." And then and then we'll advocate for you. It's just a fix-it ticket anyway, but you do need to get it fixed. Well, they'd maybe fix it, maybe not, but a call to the judge and he'd kick the ticket. And so there were, because it was justice court, we also had a circuit court. And so we would appeal. Some of those we were appealing up to circuit court, some of his decisions. And he didn't like that. The county didn't like that. But,
Yeah.
you were here to do a job and you're not. But like that particular judge or the director of the juvenile department, that's all part of that culture. I arrested a 16-year-old for DUI over there. He was ripping around the Crane High School, half-hour east boarding school. They play 8-man football over there. But we get a call and a complaint about this kid, and everybody knows everybody. Oh, it's so and so, and he's racing up and down the road. We ended up in the ditch, out on the highway, and I went out there, found him drunk, arrested him, brought him back, and then his dad and a sister came into town to pick him up, and nobody's had a problem with it, except the people, the school, I think, that had called and complained about it.
Yeah.
But it's not going to happen. It's not a cultural. This is not a cultural deal.
Yeah.
Like you can go out and buck hay bales in the summer and feed your kid beer all day. I don't care. But if he gets out on the highway and crashes or kills somebody or himself, this is why we're here. This is what happens. So sorry. But that's the cultural. It's a cultural norm over there.
Yeah.
As opposed to here, different.
But how is there a difference between interacting with people? Are people in Portland more belligerent than on Eastern Oregon?
Well,
and maybe that's not the right word.
People, yeah. As I was getting close to leaving and approaching retirement in June, or leading up to my retirement in 2013, I had mentioned to more than one person in the office that my perspective was that law enforcement is going to look completely different in 10 years. Well, here we are 12 years later. But even in 2013, things had changed enough, and I transferred back over this way in late 2006. So 6.5, 7 years over here. Different environment, totally different mentality, different political world view over here as opposed to the east side. Super conservative over there.
Yeah.
Super liberal over here.
Yeah.
So yeah, but at the end of the day, people are still people. Anybody can be belligerent.
But let me ask you this then. Did you notice a difference between when you started on your career to when you retired? Did you notice a difference in people's attitude toward you?
Well, yeah, and I think that's what I was getting at, is that as I approached retirement, that's something that I saw was this change, just the level of respect. Like people just don't care who you are. They're not recognizing the badge or the authority. I think that's what I started to notice or feel for some reason. I couldn't give you any, I can't point to one thing that made me think that or feel that way. But I think just over time, and then as I got closer, even in 2013, it was starting to look different than it did at any point prior to that. And I think I was right. that 10 years later, I mean, I don't know, I'm not in the loop
Yeah.
anymore, but just from some of the stuff I see that, uh, yeah, I, I think things have changed. I think the world of policing has evolved
Mm-hmm.
as it should, just with technology, but technology is completely different now, even than it was when I left.
Yeah.
And I know that from the stuff that I now am able to do in private investigations.
Right.
You know, some of that technology and the tools available. Like, you know, I know that OSP is using, uh, for example, data providers that we didn't have. I didn't know anything about. You know, I don't think existed when
Mm-hmm.
I retired.
Hmm. Okay, two last questions that I always ask. Did law enforcement affect your family?
Oh yeah.
Okay, in what way?
Well, um, the good way, the upside is that it provided a better life, better quality of life. Is something as simple as health insurance or benefits that we didn't have or wouldn't have otherwise had.
Mm-hmm.
Security. I mean, those are just from a quality of life perspective. I think those were the highlights probably.
Okay.
Uh, Relationships along the way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How about this? Did your years in law enforcement change the way that you view people in society?
Mhm.
In what way?
Um, Even at 30 years of age, you know, as probably stubborn as I was going in and that culture shock, I still had a sense of, and I think a lot of that, and then when I hit the road, um, I got hired because I didn't have, uh, I should probably be surprised I got hired, which I am a little bit, because I didn't have any of the background. Like I wasn't prior military,
Yeah.
and that's a big deal, especially with departments like OSP. You know, if you have prior military, that's a huge advantage.
Mm-hmm.
It's a plus most of the time. Um, but even though I didn't have that, I still got hired. Uh, but I always felt like I had a sense of right and wrong. I was probably more black and white than um, I don't know. I'm still pretty black and white, but there's a lot of things that can happen along the way that can gray the lines um, and you know, honestly, I think over the years, I think cynicism is part of that.
So you think even though you started a little bit older than most people would, that didn't prevent you from developing that cynicism?
No, no, and I think that I mean that can come from a number of different directions. I think that can
Mm-hmm.
come from arresting somebody you know that belongs in jail or incarcerated to whatever extent. And then there's a defense attorney out there that'll find some, you know, they'll find the right spot in the balloon to pop it,
Mm-hmm.
or the you know the right um, hole in your uh, in your program. Um, it could be something like that. It could just be you know just a view of society as society changes and in both places, Burns and even Portland, but Burns and Tillamook are good examples where in both of those places we made a lot of effort to reach young people, kids, you know, to have this because that back then, that's when community policing really became the thing,
Yeah.
and we saw the evolution of like Dare. Dare program. I coached a few Dare teams. You know, we had a Dare officer in Tillamook, and then somebody donated a car that somebody donated a paint job and all the graphics for. It's a Dare. You know that whole program was um, that was a big deal. In fact, most of us didn't appreciate it because we lost a patrol troop to become a dare officer and spend all day every day in a school. And so we lost somebody off the road to go into the schools and teach this dare education, this drug abuse resistance
Yeah.
education.
Do you think, talking about the community policing and the DARE program, do you think that that paid dividends later on when you have these interactions with these kids at a younger age?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you would quantify that or how you would measure that.
Yeah.
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 I mean, we like, as I mentioned, I coached a few different dare little league teams,
Hmm.
and so there was, but in communities like Tillamook, smaller,
Yes.
uh, more rural, even though it's active, it's vibrant, but relatively small. We didn't have a dare program in Burns because there weren't the resources, and we certainly couldn't devote a patrol troop and remove somebody from the road to put him in a grade school, to interact with kids.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure it served a purpose, and maybe in the right environment, a program like DARE was probably a huge benefit. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it could have been in Tillamook, but I don't know how you measure the results over years or what those kids first exposed to the program would have grown up to.
Well, I just wonder, like you say, you had coached a couple teams, DARE programs, and I just wonder if you have a little bit, especially in the smaller communities, you're having a little bit more interaction with those kids as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to Portland, you know? Maybe they never even see a police officer, whereas in these smaller communities.
Well, yeah. That's a good point. And uh, I, I only have a perspective of Portland as a comparison
Right,
from the outside looking in,
right.
and I don't, uh, I don't think the Portland area command, at least that I can remember, ever had any presence in any of the schools around here.
Yeah.
And I think as far as Portland, uh, I'm sure they see plenty of law enforcement, just from a
Different perspective.
different perspective.
Yeah. Okay, before we go, I want to make sure that we're giving you a plug for your business. What are you doing now? What's the name of your business and what kind of cases do you work on?
Yeah. Thanks for that. Well, I retired from OSP June of 2013. December of that year, I got my PI license in Oregon. And January 14, I organized Cornerstone Investigative Services Inc. It's an S corp. So I am technically a W-2 employee because it's a corporation. Had over the years, so we've been going since January of 14. Seemed like the natural progression, and when I retired, I had to do something, and
Sure.
I still had gas in the tank, so it seemed like the obvious choice. But it's been good. Gradually grown some, I think, gotten busier, that sort of thing. Um, and I believe with the law enforcement career and now, on the back end of that, law enforcement experience lends itself, at least for me, it gives us more opportunities to do a wider range of investigations or types of investigations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I when I first started Cornerstone, so just to be clear, I'm a W-2 employee. Right now, I'm the only W-2 employee. And that's just kind of the nature of the business. If I need help, I've got a handful of other investigators, licensed investigators. If I need to staff a surveillance case, I've got surveillance operators I can call. That really depends on availability.
Yeah.
And if it's the right fit, maybe I'll handle it myself. It just depends on, every case is different.
Are there specific cases that you work on, a type of case, or you kind of run the gamut, whatever?
Well, I like to think we offer a pretty broad range of services, but I think the key is we get a lot of phone calls, but e- our we offer free phone consultations to first-time callers. It's not free if they're a client. Um, but in that call, you know, a lot of that is me triaging the situation that the caller is in. Can I help you? Um, Maybe. And then if I feel like this is something that Cornerstone can help with, then we'll talk about what that looks like and how to move forward. Um, Maybe it's not Cornerstone that would be the best next step. I get a lot of calls where my response is, you don't need an investigator, especially with limited resources. You need to have an attorney.
Yeah.
Yeah, spend your money on an attorney, and then there'll be a more appropriate time in conjunction with your attorney, maybe to hire an investigator. But first things first, because we can go investigate everything, but if you can't get your case to court, then we're not going to do anything. You're just spending money.
Right.
Um, Probably, and I mentioned surveillance. We actually probably do the least. Probably the least of what we do would be surveillance. The bulk of what we do is online research. Do a lot of background investigations, different purposes, a lot of person locates, asset research. And if somebody needs boots on the ground, or if you need a witness interview, we can certainly handle that too.
So audience, to be fair here, you're probably watching this. If you're watching all these episodes, you watch this after you've seen Chris Peterson, and Chris Peterson spoke very, very highly of Duane, said he was a wizard at online searches and finding people and doing all that. So, you know, he is an investigator who has done it all. So he spoke very highly of you.
I appreciate that. And I'll let him know I appreciate that too. Yeah. Yeah, I don't. I wouldn't try to line myself up against Chris. So we don't have the same backgrounds.
Yeah. Thanks for the interview, Duane. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Niles. I
Appreciate
appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for having me.